For those who missed last week's House of the Dragon episode, please go watch that and then come back and finish this video. Too much that happened last week is continued on into this week for me to be able to talk about this week's episode of House of the Dragon in a spoiler-free manner if you are not caught up through last week. Having said that, this episode gets real Games of Thrones-y in a hurry. As usual, I will go through the episode's highs and lows as they occurred to me while watching. The first big thing was how completely Alicent has corrupted the character of Sir Criston Cole. We knew this already from previous episodes, even though we can't ignore young Rhaenyra's part in this trip to the dark side. Her dalliance with him broke a piece of him. However, Alicent caught him at his very lowest point, where he still had shreds of honor left, and she gathered him into her careless hands to warp into something completely new. And this was but one feature of this series that shows the lip service to feminism is completely misplaced. I mention this because it rears its ugly head even more bluntly later on. Following the king's death last episode, you knew things were going to get ugly, but I was not anticipating how quickly things got out of hand. And that kicked off with Cole. Then we have the fact that the sophomoric nature of adult Alicent rears its ugly head as well. She is somehow not only dumber, but more naive than her younger self, and I'm not sure how they manage that. She knows her father, or at least they show a scene in this episode that suggests she does, but events proceed quickly about which she should have at least suspected would be happening behind her back, given who her father is. And speaking of her father, Otto Hightower and company are not playing around, with or without Alicent's knowledge. I will have more to say about him in a minute, but I wanted to mention that here his plans for this point in time were both merciless and short-sighted. Not something I would have reckoned I would be calling a man who was maneuvering for decades to get his own grandchild on the Iron Throne, but there it was this week. Prince Aemon was once again a very intriguing character I am hoping to see more of. He is more serious, probably thanks to both how he got his dragon and what happened after he did, and he has a maturity about him that makes him seem to be the elder of the royal princes. Don't get me wrong, he has his flaws too, but I think they make him all the more interesting to watch. His brother, on the other hand, is a mess. Aegon is not and has never been king material, and this comes out even more this week. Just when everyone wants to make sure he is at hand following his father's death, this is shown all the more painfully. Then we get the scene that was all girl power between Alicent and Princess Rhaenys, Viserys' sister. It was smart what Alicent was attempting, and the scene would have been fine, except she is spouting dialogue that does not match reality, and Eve Best as Rhaenys points out a little bit of that. I was afraid Olivia Cooke would wind up being exactly who she is in this scene, and it is to the detriment of the scene itself. Two powerful women should not need ego boosts the way the writers wrote the scene. It should have been straightforward, a conversation that went somewhere, but it never really got to it. Instead, it wound up being an "aren't men and the patriarchy terrible, so why don't you pinky swear to be my bestie" sort of thing. Then we have an interesting race to find an insert spoiler here, and I'm not sure of the logic behind Alicent's entrance in the race. It involves some seediness, and for some reason the Queen is under the impression that the best people to send for that sort of thing is her Boy Scout Sir Criston Cole and her pretty sheltered second eldest son Aemond. Her father was much smarter in his choices, and we also get a sighting of Sonoya Mizuno's Missaria. She has much changed since we last saw her, and she is still a very fascinating character. Given where her story arc goes, I'm hoping they show more of her before it comes to its endpoint. Shortly after the race, we get a scene I was not sure would ever happen. Alicent confronting her father over anything. The fact that this was where she put her foot down is convenient to the story, perhaps a little too convenient in my opinion. It did, however, bring to the fore what has been bothering me about Otto Hightower for many episodes now, namely his overfondness for expediency, where mercy or benevolence backed by willpower would produce better outcomes. At first, I thought this tendency in policy coming from the Iron Throne in this series was due to King Viserys being a weak king. That did not fly after seeing last week's episode, where Otto and Alicent were running the kingdom while Viserys rotted to death. Even though he takes a make-them-fear-you approach to just about everything, he does not have the will to face confrontation. This shows in not only this scene between himself and his daughter, but in the policies that eventually caused conflict leading to Lord Corlys Velaryon's injury in battle with the Triarchy and the earlier War of the Stepstones. There is never the option in Otto's mind of giving adoration and loyalty a chance to settle things in this episode, especially given that the alternative is where we wound up in the end. And shortly before the end of the episode, we get a creep sighting in the form of Lord Larys Strong. If you're not sure who that is, I don't blame you. He is the court creeper who lurks in the background making eyes at Alicent for the last few episodes, and had his brother and father burned alive in episode 5, I believe it was. I knew he was a weirdo, but he has an interaction with Alicent following her confrontation with her father that gives insight into how Aegon got screwed up so badly. She is an enabler of bad mental and character defects that simply amazes me, given how she got up on her high horse about the patriarchy in the scene with Princess Rhaenys. Then we come to the end scene, and it was an interesting coronation, and probably a really bad idea, all things given. Another sign of the Hightower rush to expediency. And while my first reaction when the credits began rolling was, "Awesome!" less than 2 seconds later, I realized how dumb it all was. That one scene could have prevented the entire rest of the series if the main player in that scene had made a smarter decision. But then the rest of the series would not need to happen. And without that scene ending in stupid, HBO would have to try and figure out what to do then. And we know what happens when they go off script too far with their George R.R. Martin productions. The last thing I want to see is the horror that Game of Thrones fans had to witness in seasons 7 and 8 of that series. It was still lazy writing and left me shaking my head, even if it was done well. In summary, this episode was a mixed bag. Favorite characters like Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon were a no-show, and the characters that were in this episode were not making good decisions. And those decisions are leading to stupid results that could have been better optimized. Not having read Fire and Blood or seen the original Game of Thrones show, or even read those books, I'm not sure if this is a hallmark of Martin's Machiavellian world in which Westeros exists, or if the writers for this episode were going off script from the book, or maybe a mix of the two. Either way, it was an enthralling episode that made me loath to pause in order to make notes, but also less intelligently written in several places than it could have been. Which I guess is better than putting up with the dreck of the Rings of Power. But that should not be the benchmark anyone in Hollywood is hoping to meet. That is all I have for this video. If you like what I do here, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure the bell icon is clicked on so you get notified when new videos are uploaded, and comment down below to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. I'm still under the weather, so I'm not sure when the next video will be. Hopefully it will be soon. See you then. Tschüss.